Ryan Day did it again. His hard work on the recruiting trail helped him put together one of the best recruiting classes in the country.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Buckeyes, part of Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. It is Thursday, December 22nd in the year 2022, and this episode of Locked On Buckeyes is brought to you by Sling TV. Sling has something for everyone, especially when it comes to college football coverage. With a massive lineup of games across the ACC, the Big Ten, the Pac-12, and the SEC, I can always catch the games I want on Sling. And now you can too. Check out Sling TV now to see the massive lineup of games they have all season long. Sling, the TV you love, for a price you'll love. Try it today. During this episode, we welcome back to the show John Garcia Jr. He is Locked On's football recruiting insider, and John and I go through, recap, and discuss National Signing Day, the early National Signing Day period. We're in the midst of it right now. Discuss the commitments that came on National Signing Day, the players that put pen to paper, and how talented this recruiting class is. We also discuss if there's an issue with Ohio State recruiting. Trust me, you don't want to miss this answer from John. He's been doing this for a very long time. I know some of you think there's an issue with the recruiting, so why not discuss that very thing with a recruiting expert right here on the podcast? And as we welcome in John Garcia Jr., he is Locked On's football recruiting insider. I'd like to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college football and college basketball recruiting sponsor across the Locked On College Network, Locked On Podcast Network, excuse me. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions apply. We're here once again with John Garcia Jr. He's a staple here on the podcast along the college network, Locked On College Network. And John is a busy man because recruiting is on the forefront of every college football fan's mind as we are in the middle of the early National Signing Day period, a 3-day period where a lot of the signing has gone down on Wednesday. Ohio State, I do believe, had 19 guys sign on Wednesday. One of them, another player signing on Thursday, being Jaden Bonsu. That's where the 20 number comes from. And John, when I think about this group, from Brandon Inniss to Carnell Tate to Luke Montgomery to Jaden Bonsu, this is a really talented group.
Of course. Look, it's so easy to look at what maybe didn't happen, right? And that is the privilege of being an Ohio State fan, because there's only a few fan bases doing that had like a top 5 class. It's like Ohio State, Notre Dame, even Alabama fans are like, oh man, if we could have just got this guy. It's easy to do that from a place of privilege, but if you look at what you did sign, this is a great group. You have undoubtedly the best wide receiver class in the country. I know there's a couple other contenders. I don't want to hear it. This is the best receiver class in the country and the most ready to play right now on top of it. Those are two different things. Oftentimes not the case with Ohio State, in particular with Brandon Inniss and Carnell Tate, who I think both can come in and play right away. Noah Rogers, no slouch, and Bryson Rogers, we know. We had him higher than everyone else for a reason. This is an absolute superstar. That is a great player, a great group to have brought in. You satisfied a couple of big needs in this class as well. There was a call for the secondary. Ohio State matched that call. Jaden Bonsu signing, I think, will be perfect news. He's the glue. He is the final piece to this Ohio State puzzle, because you had a little bit of everything else. Calvin Simpson-Hunt, superstar corner. I think he will be the best corner on that Buckeye roster at one point. I absolutely love, you talk about undervalued guys. I love Cedric Hawkins. I think he is a true nickel, a guy who can absolutely play in the slot, can play deep, can probably play pure corner in a pinch if you need him to. On top of that, Malik Hartford, stud safety. Everybody's well documented that one, in-state kid for the Buckeyes there. And then Bonsu is your physicality. He is your enforcer of that group. So you've hit a little bit of everything within that secondary, even with Kayin Lee flipping to the Auburn Tigers. So you hit those marks. You grabbed an edge prospect in Joshua Mickens, which was so critical to round out this class. This class had a bit of everything in it, missing that edge presence. So adding Josh Mickens was a really big deal, flipping him from LSU in the process. Jermaine Matthews deserves some credit here as well out of Winton Woods if I was talking about the secondary guys. So big secondary class, big elite wide receiver class. You checked the boxes on the edge, and you brought in another quarterback, which at one point it looked like it maybe wouldn't happen, right? And you bring in, maybe the most productive quarterback in the country at that in Lincoln Kienholz. So if you zoom out and don't think of the emotion of Wednesday, you realize this is a very, very strong Ohio State class. I didn't even mention SI 99 pass rusher Jason Moore, who is going to be the anchor of the Ohio State D-line of the future. So this is a great class. Very typical Ryan Day. You satisfied a lot of offensive needs. You've checked some defensive boxes, and you've recruited them from all over the country, California to Texas, the Carolinas, and even a quarterback from South Dakota. So why not?
John, do you see any holes in this recruiting class with the 20 players that are currently in it right now?
Yeah, it's if it was a 25-man class, I think you'd bring in, a running back or two to maybe round out some of the skill position players. And then I think you could probably brought in another pass rusher just from a volume perspective. You can't have enough of those guys. Jason Moore's great. He can be inside out or outside in. Love the pickup of Mickens, but maybe you could have added another guy there. I know some names that the fans probably have in mind for some of those pass rushing spots. So not necessarily holes, but you could have rounded out some other position groups with a little bit more depth and volume. But at the very top, really like what this class brings.
You mentioned some of the receivers and some of the guys in the secondary, but being a former offensive lineman in high school, I gravitate towards that position. And I got to say, there's four guys here. We've talked about, I think, all four of them at some point. I know we talked about Miles Walker a little bit, and I think Austin Sareveld. But Luke Montgomery and Josh Padilla, these four guys together as a unit, these guys are talented, and some are maybe projected to be a tackle right away. Some might move inside. And the versatility there is something that Justin Fry and the O-line coach, Ryan Day, the head coach, they're going to try to be able to mix and match and find the right combination, right side versus left side with these four. And I like what they have here with these offensive linemen. And it's also great to have a quarterback in Lincoln Kienholz that you were able to get so late in the cycle to go with this group as well.
Absolutely. You've got versatility with this offensive line group, and you need that, right? Obviously, your Luke Montgomerys of the world are so polished, so ready to go right now, whether he plays right tackle or somewhere on the interior. And then you've got great frames to work with thereafter. I love that Silverfeld is the only guy over 300 pounds. I love that. That is such a reflection of modern offensive line recruiting for this offensive line haul. All these guys are going to be able to put on the weight as Ohio State sees fit, as opposed to, hey, we got to strip down this guy. We got to move this guy around. If he loses weight, he can move here. You don't have to ask those questions. And that, to me, enables you to see the field a little bit sooner, if anything. And yeah, Kienholz, to get that type of player late is just huge. Big, athletic, three-sport superstar, right? Man. Not just a three-sport guy who, Arch Manning comes off the bench for his high school basketball team. He'll come in and he'll play the pivot and he'll swing the ball around, play good defense. He's a role player in basketball. Lincoln Kienholz is the guy. He's the wing scorer on that basketball team, and then he's maybe even better in baseball. So to bring in an athlete like that, and then you ask him, hey, focus on football for the first time in your life, that is going to be so intriguing. You could legitimately make the case, Jay, that he could be the biggest gem in this entire class for anybody, not just Ohio State, that he could be the biggest, oh snap, we missed on this kid in the entire process, from us as media outlets to other colleges. They caught on late, right? Washington had him committed. Wisconsin was in on him. Obviously, Ohio State flipped him. They caught on late. But the more you look into Lincoln Kienholz, the more you like. He's got a huge arm, incredibly mobile, incredibly productive. This is exactly the type of quarterback that thrives at Ohio State. He fits more of the pre-CJ Stroud Ohio State mold, right? The Justin Fields kind of mold, like, hey, let's run everything through this guy as opposed to let's run our passing attack through this guy. So I do think that variance that he offers is going to be very interesting to look at going forward. Very similar to Devin Brown, right? And those are going to be the guys competing, once Kyle McCord, once Kyle McCord takes the helm, they'll be competing with him starting in the spring, assuming CJ Stroud takes the next step. So you got a big differences between those three guys. So I think that was a really smart player to go and grab. And if anything, compared to Brock Glenn, who was the quarterback before he flipped to FSU, I think he offers you more of that functional athleticism and true dual threat ability. Brock can move, but you wouldn't design as many quarterback runs for him as you will theoretically for Kienholz. So in that regard, it might be a better fit in Columbus.
I was thinking about Kienholz and him being an athlete, just true, straight athlete, from the baseball to the basketball to the football, just a pure athlete. And the different wrinkles that Ryan Day could dial up and formulate even on the sideline, say, hey, we've never done this in practice, but I know you, I believe in you. Here's this play. That's something that you said so well. Pre-CJ Stroud, not just you could run to the quarterback, but there was an athletic ability, athleticism, and speed and quickness that Kienholz has on the field that I think Ohio State fans will love once he gets on the field and plays consistently at quarterback, and saying, oh, we're so used to a pass-happy, air raid style, as some people call it, type of offense, but then we can do the pass-happy stuff and do some more read options, or maybe even if Ryan Day wants to do the old school triple option, throw another wrinkle into the bag. Kienholz can be that kind of guy, and I love his athleticism. You bring that with the receivers that are in this group, in Inniss, Rogers, and Tate. The passing attack of Ohio State, it's not going down, John. It's going upwards in trajectory. And I think for other teams in the Big Ten, other teams around the country, they're still playing catch up to what Ohio State's passing attack can do on the field.
100%. And it's so hard to put a group like this together because they know each other. They see, oh, this is a great receiver, just like me. And then to get them to commit 3 days in a row, I'm still not over that. Just unbelievable planning and coordination, and honestly, self-belief from Inniss, Tate, and Rogers in particular, because any one of those three in particular would be the headliner of any other receiver class in the country. Now at Ohio State, they all like share the mantle, but they're not fighting for it either, right? So it's like we collectively believe we can all do it, but individually we know we can do it ourselves on top of it. And that reminds you of these last few receiver cores, right? With Olave and Wilson and it's Smith and Jigba. Now, obviously, Marvin Harris. I mean, all these guys individually got to feel like they're the guy, but collectively they know together, we can accomplish so much more. Now, injuries have slowed that down to a degree, but in principle, it exists there. So it makes you wonder if that example that those guys provided, particularly last year, right? Last year, we saw so much cohesiveness with that wide receiver core, even though any one of them could have been the guy by themselves, any one of the four, I should say. I think that helps you bring in more groups like that because they're like, oh, we can all eat. We can all go have our own success and still go in the first round of the draft. I mean, that's something that used to not happen. But Ohio State, I think Alabama to a smaller degree recently have shown us, hey, yeah, these 2 and 3 receiver hauls that you bring in, they can all play together and all play huge parts in the ceiling of your regular season or most importantly postseason.
John, with these 20 athletes that are in this recruiting class right now, we're going to pivot and go to a different topic outside of the recruiting class next. But with the 20 guys that are here, do you see any of them getting any type of playing time on offense or defense, non-special teams plays next year as freshmen?
Absolutely. Obviously we're still looking to see what that roster will look like, right? Ohio State's got a playoff to prepare for. So, there's no opt-outs. There's no sitting out at this point. We don't quite know who will stay and who will go, and maybe the playoff will dictate a lot of that. But from a pure talent perspective, you're not keeping all these DBs off the field next year, in my mind. These receivers we talk about, even if the majority of these Ohio State players come back, which they won't, but even if they did, you're going to keep all 4 of these guys off the field as true freshmen? I don't see it. I don't see Brandon Inniss sitting. I just don't. His floor is too high. He might have the highest floor of any player in America. That kid's going to sit the bench. I don't really see that working out, at least from a consistency standpoint. I do think defensively some of these linemen have an opportunity. Look, that's a unit and a position where there's always a rotation, right? A big rotation under Larry Johnson. Do you envision Jason Moore sitting a whole lot? I really don't. You could argue he's a top 25 player in this country. Those guys typically don't sit, especially if they offer pass rushing upside, which he does. So I see those guys as more of the instant impact types. You've got a towering tight end in Jelani Thurman, who we haven't even talked about here. That could be something, depending on what the roster looks like. So I think the playoff is going to dictate a lot of that personnel-wise, but there's just too much talent with these skill positions in particular to keep these guys off the field. That's just not the same notion it used to be. The best guys will play regardless of their age, even if they're teenagers, from all over the country. So I do think in that regard, you're going to see some of these class of 23 players hit the field immediately next year.
One more thing about next year, freshmen that could start or play. Is going to be a quarterback competition at Ohio State. Stroud has not officially announced he's going to the NFL draft, but everybody thinks and believes he's going to the NFL draft in the spring of next year, which opens up the doors for Kyle McCord, Devin Brown, Lincoln Kienholz to battle it out for who's going to be QB1 at Ohio State. Do you think Lincoln Kienholz is going to be able to hold his own in this competition with the other 2 quarterbacks that are already on campus?
He's going to have to, because you have to three scholarship quarterbacks is like the requirement, right? You have to be comfortable with your top 3. So he's going to have to. Again, I think athletically he offers you something that the other 2 might be lacking in. And look, there's such an unknown with Lincoln, right? He wasn't – I don't believe he came to camp. I don't believe this was something that was developed over the long term relative to his Ohio State interest. There's so much still we don't know about Lincoln compared to all these other quarterbacks that we all cover so closely. He wasn't an Elite 11 guy. He wasn't this guy that was so visible as a high schooler, mainly because he was playing these other sports in the off season. So we don't know what the floor is there. And we don't know how much he's going to improve in a short amount of time, because he's going to focus on one sport, which he's never been able to do in his life. So there's so many variables and unknown to Lincoln Kienholz. So the fact that he is an early enrollee, he'll be there in 2 weeks or so. That is so big. At 6'3", 185, you expect him to easily put on some good weight. I think he'll be 6'4", 200 pounds by the time, the 23 season begins. How do you utilize that athleticism out of Pierre, South Dakota, which is a sentence I've never said in my life? How do you utilize that in your quarterback competition or, on your scout team, throughout spring? How does that look? There's so much unknown with him that it's going to be fascinating. Almost no matter what happens, it's going to be fascinating just to see what it looks like, because compared to every other Ohio State quarterback that Ryan Day has brought in, literally, we've seen all of them so much more than Lincoln Kienholz at the same stage. So I think even for Ohio State, there's some uncertainty with what he is going to bring. And that's exciting because if it hits and if it's right, Ohio State will look like geniuses, and Kienholz will be one of the better stories in college football. And who doesn't love that?
Wednesday was a day that brought different emotions to numerous Ohio State football fans. When you hear or there could be a commitment from either Damon Wilson or Mateo Uiagalelei, and then you hear, Kyan Lee might flip to Auburn. Hugh Freeze, really? Well, he did flip to Auburn. I think John mentioned that earlier. Mateo Uiagalelei went to Oregon, and then Damon Wilson committed to Georgia. Previously, we didn't have John on for this, but Keon Keeley ended up committing to Alabama. There were some decommitments and flips previously, and people are wondering, John, not just with signing day specifically, but recruiting as a whole, is there a problem with Ohio State recruiting to where they're not getting the top guys? I don't buy into that thought. I understand it's the nature of the beast, and kids are doing things, and they're making commitments. No, I don't want to go here. I don't want to go there. I think Austin Novosad, I think he even decommitted from Baylor, and I think he went to a different school. And Ohio State was going after him.
Everybody went to Oregon.
Yeah. So was it Miami last year? Now it's Oregon, A&M a little bit last year. People are saying there's a problem or asking if there's a problem. I don't think there is. I think the kids are just making these decisions at different times, in different ways, in a verbal. It's not a full, hard, in-paper commitment. And so they know they can make a verbal commitment, still go on recruiting visits. John, what say you about all this stuff with Ohio State recruiting where they're not getting some of the top guys that they've been going after for quite a long time?
Look, if this was a problem over multiple recruiting cycles, I would read into it, right? If like right now in this cycle, you could say, hey, I'd like to see another edge prospect, right, on board beyond Mickens and maybe more. But then you look back to last year and they signed, 2 or 3 or 4 edge prospects, including Kenyatta Jackson, who was one of the best in the country. So you're like, well, it's not a multi-year issue, just kind of stumbled down the stretch. And look, how many recruitments were more intense than Uiagalelei and Damon Wilson? I mean, those were truly nitty-gritty back and forth. And at the end of the day, he went with the school Uiagalelei that he grew up rooting for with Oregon.
Yeah.
And Wilson ended up taking an extra trip to Georgia and really loved Athens and what they've built recently on the defensive side of the ball. How could you blame either of those two? Again, Ohio State wins some of those, but they're going to lose some of those as well. So if this was a multi-year edge issue specifically, yeah, I would ask some of those questions. But you brought in great talent and volume in the last cycle, and you did still hit on Josh Mickens late in this cycle to where you're going to be okay and stabilized. So these aren't multi-year issues. These are isolated situations that you just got beat for. I mean, it happens in recruiting. It's not the draft, right? You've got to go out and win almost every day with these kids, and that's becoming harder. There's more variables for these kids to consider every single day. So I have a hard time thinking any school signing a top 5 class has a recruiting problem. I really do. Again, could you be nitpicky and spoiled and say, yeah, I would like a little bit more of this? Sure. Again, Alabama fans are doing that today. Texas A&M fans did it last year, and they had the greatest class of all time on paper, even though like 10 of those kids have already hit the portal. So it's just the nature of being a fan and fandom. So I understand it, but it's not a multi-year, multi-layered problem at Ohio State relative to any one position. You've had great secondary hauls year in, year out, great offensive line hauls year in, year out. I'm not even have to address wide receiver or quarterback. And the edge class last year was really strong. Not as strong this year, but you still got some guys. So I think it's really hard to nitpick in that regard. And then you think about, a position that Ohio State didn't recruit well or try to recruit much this year at running back. I mean, look what you've signed in the last few classes at that position, right? I mean, Dallin Hayden looked really good in his early runs as a true freshman this year. Obviously, he had a ton of injuries to deal with before that point. And then the year prior, you signed Pryor and Henderson. I mean, so it's nitpicky at best, not something that is a multi-year, multi-class issue. No way.
John, last thing for you here, as there are 20 guys that have already signed, and the early signing period is not over. That ends on Friday. And then you have another signing period. I do believe that's in February.
Yep.
Do you think, and there's possibly kids that signed on signing day, but won't announce until an All-American game on national television.
Correct.
So do you think there will be more athletes added to this recruiting class? And if so, who comes to your mind?
That's a good question. I think Ohio State's got an opportunity to kind of stay put in this cycle. There are a few prospects, as you mentioned, that are going to announce at these all-star games. So maybe you grab a player that was maybe secondary on your list, a backup type guy, and you missed on prospect A, so prospect B gets the green light. I don't have those names in front of me at the moment. I think this is a strong 20-man class. I think if you do add more players to it, you might have to go find them and identify them and push now, right? Or maybe they were buried on your board, didn't sign with anyone else this week. There's going to be a little bit of luck involved with that. Or you go outside the box, right? Multi-sport guys, more athletic project types that are still out there. But the majority of the kids have already signed. And if that's how this class is going to wrap up, still a pretty darn good one.
John, it's fun having you on the show, fun having you back, and I really enjoy getting these recaps of National Signing Day. Busy. I can only imagine how busy you have been over the past, not like 24 hours, this entire week. I can only imagine that. But thanks for coming back on the show. If you could, let everyone know where they can follow you on Twitter, and then all the good things you guys are doing right now over at SI with National Signing Day being right now.
Yeah, look, we've got the rankings up. Blog was up all day yesterday, all for free, si.com/college, or just come talk ball with me on Twitter. The Notre Dame fans have been on me the last 24 hours because I said they have the best decommitment class in the country. I stand by that. So come talk about it. John Garcia _JR.
And guys, you can follow me on Twitter at jstevens07. Christmas is right around the corner. Ohio State got gifted a commitment by Joshua Mickens on National Signing Day. That was a huge get for them. I hope everyone's done with their Christmas shopping. John, you're down there in Florida. Those of us up here in the Midwest are getting ready for a winter storm. Temperatures dropping crazy, a lot of snow. But I just love football. Love having John on the show. And I can't wait to have John back on the show again to talk Buckeye football recruiting. John, thanks for coming on once again. I greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Jay. And if I don't talk to you, man, happy holidays, happy New Year. And we'll see you in 23, God willing.
John, same to you.
Take care, buddy.